I got a message the other day from a young woman who has been told by the influential men in her life that God does not care if we are happy. Happiness is not something that we should worry about. Happiness is not something we should pursue. Happiness is irrelevant to our existence as human beings who follow God. And honestly, is kind of the whole picture that if you are concerned about being happy at all, then something is wrong with you and you're living in a sinful mindset. And just to pile it on top of that is this subconscious message, at least usually subconscious, because I think there's probably times when people actually say this straight out, but most of the time it's just this subconscious corollary that if you are miserable and suffering, that means you are holier. And as a result, you should really expect for nothing to go well or operate smoothly. You should expect and anticipate and plan on your relationships, your work, your life. Life is just going to be brutally hard. It's going to be miserable. It's going to be filled with suffering. It's going to be unpleasant and unhappy. And if you are a good Christian, a good follower of Jesus, there is nothing you can do about it except thank him for the trials and just keep on living misery. I think that's heresy. Call me a heretic. I've been called worse. On the other hand, I do believe that it is probably, so my first question when I get this is, how did we get to that point in the first place? What was the method, the pattern, the backlash, the pendulum swing? What were we running from to get to this idea? And I do think there's a legitimate opposite ditch. The hedonistic humanism that says, I am out for what is best for me, darlings. Looking out for number one. Self-care in the perspective of self-worship. If you don't make me happy, I'm drop-kicking you out of my life. Self-healing, where you're just expected to heal yourself, and there's no role of God in any of this. So that's a very highly, some would say narcissistic, I would say Luciferian, satanic, devilish. It's the character of the devil. Me first, myself and I. Everything must be what I want, what makes me comfortable, what I like, when I like it. And so there's this pursuit of happiness on the surface that is the opposite ditch. In this opposite ditch is this self-gratification, self-pleasing, where everything that you are chasing is not for the glory of God. It is not for the good of others. It is honestly not even for the good of yourself from a character point of view. It's for the good of my pleasure now. And that is toxic too. It's just as toxic as the whole, if you want to be holy, you will never be happy message. I don't really think the devil cares which ditch he draws us into, as long as we are scrabbling around in the bottom of a ditch and not connected to Jesus. He doesn't really care. If you're chasing misery and thinking it makes you holy, or if you're chasing self-pleasure and calling it happiness at the expense of being a decent human to everyone else, he doesn't care. Either way, you're not living like Jesus. You're not surrendering your heart. You're not glorifying God. And I realize this is really triggery for a lot of people. I know there's a popular marriage book, which I actually like a lot of pieces of, called Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. And his premise in that book, before he began being much more educated about abusive relationships was that chasing happiness doesn't give us happiness ourselves. God's desire for us is to be holy, not just to be happy. And I think I know where he was coming from on that. But I think it's also been misapplied badly and caused intense harm to a lot of people, including the young woman who wrote me a message asking me to talk about this. So if we say, God doesn't want you to be happy, he wants you to be holy, there is some truth to that, depending on how you define happiness. If you define happiness as lustful self-gratification and the pursuit of one's own self-centered pleasure, then no, God does not want you to be happy more than he wants you to be holy. What God wants for you is to pursue Christ-likeness, holiness, the experience of being sanctified and transformed over a lifetime into the image of Jesus, reflecting God's character. Very different from justification, where we receive Jesus' gift of salvation free at the cross that we do no work for. Not confusing the two. I'm not saying this is a works-based theology. I'm saying that once we know Jesus, there is transformation in the heart that naturally and beautifully and freely and joyfully takes place, right? When we love Jesus and we are surrendered to Jesus, we become more decent human beings because we are connecting more and more closely with reflecting the image of God as we were created to do, right? So if we take the idea that God wants you to be holy more than he wants you to be happy, and we are defining happiness in that perspective as self-centered gratification at the expense of holiness and righteousness and kindness, then absolutely God's greatest goal for us is to be holy, to be transformed from glory to glory, as it says in Corinthians. By beholding, we become changed, for us to be looking at Jesus and moving into a life that is more and more like him. However, when we are focused on holiness from a healthy perspective, where we are pursuing the heart of God and responding to the heart of God, happiness is the natural outcome. Happiness is what happens when we are unified with God. When I know that I am doing God's will in God's way, when my heart is connected to God, when I am confident in my identity as a woman of God, when I'm not living for the approval of other people, then whether I lose a spouse or get cancer or have to face really hard losses of friendships or projects or things that would be devastating under other circumstances, I can still be happy because my happiness comes from a holy, beautiful, sacred, life-transforming connection with Jesus Christ, and realizing that I am created for his glory in Imago Dei, the image of God. So from that perspective, our happiness is God's top priority, not the fleeting kind of happiness that you get from spending $500 in Disneyland for a day. That would be misery to me anyway. So I don't know how, but yeah, just moving on. But yeah, my sensory overload would be out of this world. That being said, it's not fleeting happiness. The happiness that comes from becoming more and more like Jesus, from living a life where your heart is at peace, from having a clean and pure conscience, where you know that you are doing the best that you can to follow the truth that you have understood, that you are willing-hearted and teachable, that you are open to learning, that you are in a place of healthy boundaries. You are not being overtaken by other people and their expectations of you, because God is the supreme source of your identity. In those cases, holiness brings happiness. So here's how I see it, to kind of summarize. If we were to pursue an identity of holiness that comes from deep, connected, intimate relationship and trust in God, not works-based, not performance-based, not other people's opinion-based, then we will receive and discover happiness. Holiness brings happiness. True holiness brings real happiness. Chasing happiness in the world's perspective, the things that just please me for my own selfish gain, will neither bring lasting happiness nor godly holiness. So if you pursue one, you get both. If you pursue, the other, you get neither one. So that's my response. I hope you got to watch this. To you who sent me the message asking about it, I'll send you a little message letting you know it's up. I saw some other questions come up about other things you'd like for me to discuss, something about justification and grace from the cross. I'll do another video on that sometime. All right, we'll talk soon.